I had my first solo show scheduled with Warren when I was 24. I was hanging out with some friends and playing poker and getting as drunk as I possibly could to work up enough courage to go to my own opening. Because I didn't know what to expect. So we go down there at 4:00 in the afternoon, and there's 13 paintings in the show, and everything is red dotted. What? The show is sold out, and when did this happen?
All right. For all of those people who've been listening in, you know, the kind of format, what we're doing. I don't know how much you got to hear, but hopefully you got to hear a lot of what we're talking about. I had the rattlesnakes were out in Tucson now, so I've been posting them as I see them, and the bobcats and everything else in the world. So, Billy, welcome.
Yeah.
How are you?
Thank you. I'm okay. How about yourself?
Yeah, I'm okay. Yeah, just there we go. We're now in big picture format. That's better. Oh yeah, you look better. So I love the wall. I've been to your studio
Right.
many times, you know, and it's just a blur of paint. Yeah, just tell me about that. Just since we're looking at, that's where are you cleaning your brush stroke there? Are you looking at different types of colors you're going to put on?
Now, what happens is I put these small mounds of color on a glass palette so that I can apply those to the very specific areas on the canvas. And what happens is if, more than a few hours or the next day, I come back and I'm using the same color, sometimes there'll be nodules that have dried up and they get mixed in with the other paint that's much wetter. And if I get it on the canvas, I just take it off and stroke it on the wall. And so it's just, leftover paint that has no business being on the canvas.
Yeah.
So that's how they
kind of, I see. So it kind of curdles almost. And then if it doesn't look right, it's not flat, then you get rid of it and you put it on your wall. So one of these days you should put like a canvas there. You should pin a canvas on the wall, do that. And then when you're done, you'll have all these beautiful imagery that you can turn into something else or just leave it as a painting.
Right.
I'm dead serious.
I know. It's like Joan Mitchell or Helen Frankenthaler.
Yeah, no,
Monet,
exactly.
Or Monet. The palette is much more like Monet, but without when you look at the wall.
So
like
for those people who are tuning in, what we're going to do today is that we're having a Q&A clearly for Billy Schenck, who is our artist that we have our opening today for in Tucson, which is new work. But we're also going to make this into a podcast so that we can preserve this, and we'll talk a little in depth about Billy's past as well as the present work that's coming on. So, and then when we come to the Q&A part at the end, you can ask questions via the internet, and then we'll read those, and Bill will take some questions. So for individuals who might be watching this and turned on as a podcast, if you watch it on YouTube, you can see the imagery. If not, we'll do the best to script if we can, but YouTube would be a better way to watch us in the future. So Bill, tell us a little bit about, we'll skip over the growing up part, but let's talk about and people, by the way, if you want to get a more in-depth backstory of Billy, you can go to his other podcast on the Art Dealer Diaries, and we've got a couple of there that are very interesting. But tell us a little bit about maybe from when you started art school, because that's an interesting kind of a ride that you had on many levels.
Yeah, well, I think my mother had serious expectations of me going to college, and I was definitely interested in going, but my grade point average was just barely over 2 point. And in my junior and senior year, knowing that I had rehired to get into college, I started taking art classes, knowing I could get an A each semester in those. And that did help. I got it all the way up to 2.1. It wasn't enough. She took me around to different campuses in Ohio and Indiana. And I applied to some of these colleges and didn't get accepted to any of them. So as a backup, last resort, I applied to a local art school, which was Columbus College of Art and Design. And, I don't know what quality my portfolio was or whatever, but they took me. So I thought, wow, at least I got in somewhere. But I knew by the time I was 17 that I really wanted to take art seriously, especially after the idea of going to college, and I had no specific notion of what I would be or what I would do if I went to, a regular art college. But once I decided to go to the art school, I was deadly serious about what I might be able to do proceeding in that direction. So, and this is when I began, applying oil paint to canvas, it was figures or still life or whatever in front of us, with instruction. And as bad as I was completely committed from the first day I was in painting class. I was just turned 18 years old, that this is what I wanted to do, without any concept of where that would lead or, what would happen. So I was in Kansas City, Columbus College of Art and Design for 2 years. But I got sideways with the dean and the head of the painting department, and they were polite, but they wanted me to leave. So I transferred what credits I could to Kansas City Art Institute, because I had other friends who I had met earlier who had already gone out to Kansas City. In fact, there was a little bit of a migration that continued every semester from Columbus College of Art and Design out to Kansas City. I think at one point there was around 8 or 9 or 10 of us from Columbus that were at Kansas City. And I roomed with Stanley Whitney for a couple semesters, and of everybody around me, and I mean the instructors on down to the students, Stanley struck me as the most grounded person that I knew, which was really important for me at that time because I was not. And Stanley ended up getting a scholarship for a summer program at Yale University to study with Philip Guston, and then he went back to graduate school at Yale. And so that was what I thought, okay, this is the right path to take. And I quickly figured out that Yale would be the best graduate program in the country. I also was not going to get accepted at Yale. I knew my type of figurative work that I was doing, which was very Francis Bacon oriented, influenced by, and it was a really crude variation of his work. And Stanley also was headed to New York after that. And that was where a couple of other of the art students who were older than me had also gone to. Dan Christensen was a couple years ahead of us, and he had gone to graduate school and gotten an MA in Bloomington, and then went on to New York and quickly established a career as an abstract painter. So this was where I thought, if you were going to, take the risk and be serious about making an art career, you went to New York. And this is 1969, 1970. And there was not a lot of galleries anywhere in the United States. There was a couple on the West Coast, and the rest that were contemporary art galleries were in New York. And I want to put this in context. My guess is that from coast to coast, there were roughly 350 contemporary artists. So it was easy to track everybody's career. If they were showing in the galleries in New York or in LA, you knew who they were. It was just that easy because there just wasn't that many. And as the art market began to grow in the US, and US collectors began collecting American painters, but then there was a proliferation of galleries and artists, from that time on. So it just exponentially exploded. It would be sort of like the major leagues. In 1969, how many were there? 15, 16, and now there's 32. So it's, that kind of a world. There was just more money involved, so more people got interested. And so now, of course, it's much more competitive.
Yeah, much
So
more. And now when
yeah,
when you were going to in New York, what time frame was this? Was this
well, I left, I had finished all my credits with Kansas City in December 1969. So, and I was married at the time, and we went back to Ohio, where we were from, spent Christmas with our folks, and then we were in New York the first week of January 1970. And there was Boyd Mefford was an artist who had been what do you want to call it, an associate instructor at Kansas City Art Institute for the last year I was there, and we got to be friends with him. And he was working on some project, I'm not sure, upstate or somewhere else. But anyway, his loft was available, and he wanted us, and it was convenient for us. So we stayed in his loft on Wooster Street in Soho, which was just becoming, the new viable art neighborhood in New York. And we took a lease on the floor on the fifth floor. And I spent, 3, 4, 5 months building that out so that we could live there. But it was convenient that Boyd, let us have the loft on the second floor. So I didn't have to commute very far until we got that built. So that's where I ended up in Manhattan. And so it was on Wooster Street between Prince and Spring.
and this is 1970?
Yeah, 1970 until I left in the summer of 1975.
Yeah, but a lot occurred in between that, including working at the factory, right? Andy Warhol
Well,
factories.
I didn't work at the factory. No, I actually had made my first trip as an adult. I'd been there with my mother when I was a kid a couple times. But no, when I was a student at Columbus College of Art and Design, I went to New York in February of 1966. And I had enough gas money. I was with a couple friends, and we made it to New York, but we didn't, think far enough ahead to figure out how are we going to eat, or where were we going to stay, or where were we going to get gas money to come back to art school. And I ran into somebody in a cafe in Greenwich, in Greenwich Village, and he said, "I can get you a gig with Warhol." I thought, "You got to be kidding me!" But we drove over to the Lower East Side to this place called the Dom, which had been the Polish American Embassy, and Warhol was sponsoring the Velvet Underground, the first psychedelic acid rock band, in America. And they were playing nightly at the Dom. And so I met Andy that afternoon. I met a couple of other people that were working with him. The band members hadn't come in yet. It was around 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. But he said, "Sure, yeah, just help set up the equipment. There's we'll do this light show, and there's these cameras, and all this stuff." So that was my involvement with Andy, and through him, I was meeting literally every famous underground person in the U.S., even though I didn't know who they were for the most part at the time.
Right.
But they were all there. I mean, everybody hung out where Warhol's scene was. So and then I came back to New York in 1970, and I really didn't follow up with Andy at that time. I mean, his was a, darker scene. And I found out in retrospect, there weren't any artists that were really associating with Andy by the 70s. Although he was collecting, to some extent, some of his peers and other younger artists. He did come to my second solo show. I wasn't there. The show had opened the day before, and he came on a Saturday afternoon, but the gallery director and owner told me that, Andy had come by. I remember Tony Perkins came to my first show, so it was a big deal for me to get representation so young. I got picked up by Warren Benedict Gallery. It was just becoming a gallery with the help of Ivan Karp, OK Harris, and Ivan steered me to Warren. And so they took me on when I was 23. And I had my first solo show scheduled with Warren when I was 24. And this was a great high point. I was hanging out with some friends and playing poker and getting as drunk as I possibly could to work up enough courage to go to my own opening. Because I mean, I didn't know what to expect. So we go down there at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and there's 13 paintings in the show, and everything is red dotted. What? That the show is sold out, and when did this happen? It was incredible. It's never been the same since.
That's not true.
50 years.
Not true at all. And
I was sure starstruck when I was 24. That was pretty impressive. And then Warren gave me another show. And then by then I'd met Lou Mizell, who had shown up in 73. And I really liked the artist that he was picking up, and I liked his style. And he definitely became a mentor to me as to how art careers and art business worked, along with Ivan Karp. I mean, they're both mentors. So anyway, I moved over to Lou and did a third solo show with him in April 1975. And in between, I'd had a solo show in Brussels, Belgium. And I was represented in Milan and Paris and Geneva and London. Although I didn't get as much stuff sold between them, I don't know, I got spoiled, having all this international stuff. Yeah, and getting in museum shows, getting into museum collections. Ivan got me into, I'm not even sure, 3 or 4 museums that I wasn't even aware of, but he was steering museums to buying my work and all that. And he just, he wasn't the type of guy to call up and say, hey, I just got you into the, Coos Bay Art Museum or the Tucson Museum of Art. But the first painting that is there in Tucson, that's a result of Ivan, who had sold that painting to a movie actress in Paris who eventually donated it. So that was all a wonderful surprise, these things that, Ivan was doing. And then the oil crisis, and there was just a big downturn in the art market in general in the mid 70s. And I was at a point where I could not afford to continue making a living from my art. So I couldn't stay in New York. So I thought I'd relocate to closer to where my subject matter was. And that's how I came to the Phoenix area first. And then I also already had a place up in Jackson Hole. So I just became a young snowbird, moved back and forth between Jackson and Scottsdale, Phoenix, Mesa.
Yeah, and you started working with Elaine Horowitz fairly early on too, right? She was the great,
I met her.
gallerist in Palm Springs and Phoenix and Santa Fe.
Yeah, that was, again, luck was on my side. I mean, I happened to come to Soho and get picked up, and championed by, Ivan Karp, and then came out west, got my feet on the ground and met Elaine and got picked up by her. And I had my first solo show with her. And she was reluctant to give me a show at first. And so I was just sort of in the wings, in the background. And I can't think, Paul Jenkins from New York, an abstract painter. I had a show scheduled for a month from April 15th up through May, and canceled kind of at the last moment. And at that time, that was considered a really shoulder season. The heart of the season is pretty much from Christmas until, the 1st of April. It was then. It wasn't as long as it is now. So I jumped in and said, Elaine, let me have that spot, because I had the paintings. I had more than enough paintings. I had and plus I had the paintings I had not sold in New York. So I think there was about 16 or 17 paintings. And even in that shoulder season, she sold about 14, 15 of those. And boy, I was off and running again. And was I, a lucky kid to get picked up by, the best art dealer, art star outside of New York City. She was it. And so I had a great run. with Elaine until 91, until she died that fall.
Yeah, and other people like Fritz Scholder were working with Elaine
Yep.
too until
Yep.
1980 or so. Yeah, she
And
had
that's how I
all the
met.
great ones.
Yeah, that's how I met Fritz, was through Elaine, and she had plenty of talented people. A lot of terrific people.
And there's a book that Julie Saucy did on Elaine
Yeah.
Horowitz that just recently came out. You're in, all the people, all the artists that were in there.
Yeah.
I don't know if
South
Julie's listening
Rising.
today. Shout out her book. Yeah, what's
Yeah.
the title? What's the
I
title?
think it's Southwest Rising.
Yeah, that's right. Something like
I
that.
think that's what
Yeah.
it is.
And it's a very interesting book on that whole time frame. So you go through these machinations from New York to Santa Fe, and then you basically, and also Phoenix and Jackson Hole, but you really became this kind of, you dug in deep, right? I mean, you started rodeoing, you started,
Yeah.
being involved in collecting
Yeah.
all the artwork and artifacts and going out to Monument Valley and all those kind of things, right?
Yep. Yeah, it was really, by my decision to start making paintings based on, black and white movie stills, it sucked me into the entire cowboy lifestyle. Now, I had spent a lot of summers, growing up in Lander, Wyoming. And so I was around rodeo, I was around cowboys, but that was not specifically the kind of genre I was interested in. But once I got involved with that, through my own paintings, yeah, then I had to see what the lifestyle was like. Yeah, so in Jackson and all around the northwest portion of Wyoming, I started entering all these rodeos, right? Trying to ride bareback and saddle broncs, getting thrown off of everything. But by then I was hooked on this. So even after I quit rodeoing when I was 30 in Jackson, that was my social life. I would go down to the rodeo on Wednesday and Saturday nights, and I would help, in any way I could with the production of the show. So I didn't want to become a roper. I didn't like the idea of roping. But they invented team penning, and as an what's the word? Outgrowth of that was ranch sorting. And I got introduced to that in 1996. And some rancher friends of mine up in my portion of the county, in Teton County, invited everybody over who had horses and said, we're going to teach you this sport and see what you think. And they had the cows, they had their arena. So we formed, after they showed us how this all worked, they said, okay, let's do a jackpot. Everybody make up teams. So we made up 27 teams. I had the only all art team. I had Philip Garraway, he's an art dealer, was one of my partners, and Kathy Whiffler, who's a plein air painter, still living in Jackson. And
very good.
So we went around and chased these cows, and we ended up in second place. And I thought, wow, I am back rodeoing. This is terrific. And I was off and running from then on. And I've been, ranch sorting, team pinning ever since.
And it got more serious with, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, along the way, I won a world championship in 2009, and I won 4 state championships in New Mexico. So that was a huge gratification, because I was a miserably mediocre athlete with a giant competitive attitude with nowhere to put it until I came into ranch sorting and team penning.
That's wonderful. And so now we'll kind of transition a little bit to the show that we're doing, which is New Works.
Okay.
And maybe, I thought I'd just point out to people, this is a book that's on Billy. He's got a few books, but this is one that's kind of the main book, Schenck in the 21st Century, which is a really beautiful book that you can get online through our website if you want. And it kind of tells the story of, the myth of the hero and the truth of America. And so, we kind of have a smattering of some of those types of symbolism and paintings that we have. And the first painting that we'll show are new paintings actually that you're doing. And maybe you have one in the studio we can see there, but maybe you can talk to us about these. Yeah, well, these are really interesting.
This is a brand new series that I started last spring, maybe. And living here in New Mexico, I became, I don't know, fascinated, with these roadside descansos, which are everywhere here in New Mexico, maybe to a lesser degree in some of the other Western states. And
Yeah, we
what
have
they
them.
are, you have them in Arizona
Oh yeah.
as well.
Oh yeah. Lots of them.
And descanso is a Spanish word which translates to where the soul rests in peace. And this is the descansos out on the roads are where people have had accidents and been killed along the highway. So they build these little memorials or altars, to their lost ones. And I just decided to add, sort of a twist to the whole thing, since there is no such thing as a cowboy descanso. They were non-existent until I invented them. And I invented them in my own rodeo arena at the back of my property. I had a carpenter build six, seven different styled crosses, wood crosses. And so I set those up, and I got different cowboy hats to put on top. And, as you can see in the painting here, a gun belt and a holster. And these are going to be representative of, the relics of this particular cowboy's life. And so these are my rodeo boots that I put down in the front. And you may not have noticed that there's 2 bullet holes through the hat. And maybe that's how our cowboy ended up out there in the middle of the desert. So I did a series of these things, and I just kept using different artifacts. Sometimes I'd use Navajo blankets, all of which I've acquired from you.
Yeah, we'll show the next one, which has one of those
Yeah,
transitional.
that was the latest
actually,
one I
late
got.
classic.
Right.
Yeah.
That
It's
was
an
the latest one that I got
1870s
from you.
blanket.
Right.
So those who can't see it, this is beautiful red blanket with
Yeah.
blue indigo and green indigo crosses.
Right.
And describe that one a little bit, if you would.
Well, I kind of tried to do something a little bit different with each one of these. I mean, it would sometimes be a different hat or whatever. In this case, I just thought, I don't know, a lot of people owned Navajo blankets, whether they were Anglo or Navajo or Plains Indian or whatever. So this would not have been necessarily out of character, or it could have even been a Hispanic cowboy who had this blanket. And I just, decided to have, the moving herd of cows going across, the desert in the background, of course, without their cowboy. So
yeah. Well, Charles Lummis was actually buried in his great Navajo serape. So
who was?
at least was in it. Charles Lummis, who started the
was he?
Southwest Museum in LA and a good friend of Maynard Dixon. So, there's some precedents for great blankets being associated with this kind of thing. So when you do a series like this, so this is something you come up with and it hasn't been done, it comes out of your imagination. You don't do like a huge number of them. There's a group that you do and say, okay, that's it. And I kind of move on. Would that be accurate to say?
Yeah. I started doing that, like, let's go back, for instance, to when I did the cowgirl and cowboy stuff with the Rolls Royce. There were 7 of those paintings over a period of 6 years. I mean, so that was a very small series, but boy, I got a lot of recognition. A lot of people who have known my work for a while, will be familiar with those. And that was Elaine, which is vintage rolls. It was a 1952 roll. So that was a short-lived series. This one, the Descansos, I've done maybe 7 or 8. And then I just, moved on to the next idea, that comes into my head. And I do ricochet back and forth between stuff. Quite often, I'll be working on a painting and there'll be, some aspect of that. I think, well, what would this look like if I added this element and I changed this? And so there's a direct evolutionary process, from one canvas to another, but it can move, from a cowboy on horseback all the way around to a Navajo lady, with a blanket on horseback, or with her sheep on the ground, or just a straight landscape. Then I do caption paintings, and those sort of percolate in my head, actually, for a longer period of time. And I specifically, the way they hone the dialogue in a screenplay. I will make notes and write down the potential idea for a caption. And it might be a couple days to a couple years before I've got it exactly the way I think it should, and to match it up, with an image. So, and I have ideas like this that, are in my head, or I make notes and I get to them sometimes very soon and other times several years later. So I'm not at a loss, for subject matter.
Idea.
It's just,
Uh-huh.
it's just
Yeah.
a matter of which way I'm going.
Next painting we'll talk about. This is one that's maybe not new works, but I included it in the show because it's such a wonderful piece. And talk about some of the Native American imagery that you do. This is Acoma women, and you collect pots. So is that a
Right.
pot out of your collection?
No, actually not. This is the woman on the right. That's from an old black and white photograph. Actually, around the turn of the century, at what are the train depots? Where
the Fred Harvey train depots.
Yeah, and the women would be all gathered, with pots in front of them on the ground as tourists were departing from the train for a stop. And this was part of an image where the woman was walking away, and I love the idea of painting the women with pots. Plus, I get to use the blankets, which, as you know, I collect Navajo wool as well. Now, the pots I collect are prehistoric, and in past years, I included them, but sometimes I use, late 19th, early 20th century pots as well. But it's like I get to involve two of my passions, in one image when I get to paint. And I come and go with them. I don't paint very many of the pottery women, but I love it when I do.
I thought this one was particularly successful.
Yep.
Next images, we'll talk about some of the pieces these are brand new pieces that you've done with these rock structures. The next three paintings will have that. And again, the great blanket that you have on. And but painting that rock structures like that's kind of difficult to find the right way to do it in front of a person. And in this case, you've done it very successfully. Maybe you can talk about along the
what happened here is there's a loop that goes around through Monument Valley, and as a tourist, you can drive around in your own vehicle, through some portion of Monument Valley, but really to go into further back canyons, you have to go with a guide. And I had also been over to the west side of that rock wall of the western side of Monument Valley is this other area they call Mystery Valley. And I'd only been in the southern portion of that, both on horseback years ago, as well as with a guide. And I had no idea there was a dirt road that extended all the way back up to almost connect to the road that goes up to the visitor center in Monument Valley. So this was all new country to me. And I've been in there now maybe 4 or 5 times. And, I keep going back because the drama of the light just changes so radically, from the morning, midday, it's kind of flat, it's something else. And then late in the afternoon, it gets dramatic again. It also depends on what time of the year you're in there. So I make a point. I was just out in Monument Valley last week to catch light in the March sky, which is the sun is much lower in the sky than it is, in June, July, August. So I wanted to, get those longer shadows with that sun being lower in the sky all the time. So this was a direct result of my my more recent trip to Mystery Valley. I think 219, because I couldn't go anywhere in 220. We were locked down.
Yeah. And I love the cloud in it. I really do.
Oh, thanks. And the figure is, this was a painting assistant of mine who is Blackfeet and got a little bit of Hispanic blood. And this is one of my blankets. I think I didn't get this one from you, but anyway, I also have all the clothes in the wardrobe, and that's my horse that I rodeo on. And so I shoot her, just around here within a couple of miles of where I live. And then I use, that image and put her, in front of this, huge rock formation. I mean, this is real typical of how I build an image. I mean, it's layered, and I use lots of different photographs sometimes. The background, for instance, is altogether a different location. The mesa's back there. I think that's Canyonlands. And then I just, pretty much build the skies and the cloudscapes, out of my head. Although on occasion, I do use specific reference of slides that I've shot. I've got a great location 1 mile from my house. It's up on a high point, and I have a 360-degree view. So it's kind of like my religion. If there's any clouds in the sky, to just go up there at dusk and just see what the clouds are going to do. So I don't have to go far for gathering reference material. Yeah.
Next
that's
photo.
one. Okay.
On sandstone and slate. That's a cool one.
Yeah, I really like that. I've painted this rock formation in different situations, but I never had it where it was the center of attention and split the figures to either side of it. But it would be, if you were there, as if, these Navajo ladies were just traveling through, like, which they could have been doing in real life, just going beyond the rock, behind the rock. So I just wanted to, do this with a different perspective. And I like the idea of leading into the subject matter, with a foreground that's got, chamisa and sage and broken rock, just, to lead you into the main subject matter.
Next, please. So we have the conversation, which,
yeah,
the great, you might just describe it for the audience that might not be watching this.
Okay. The landscape is, now I have a guide that I've just been working with in the last couple of years, and he's taken me to locations I didn't even know they existed. Now this is clear to the south side of Monument Valley, and there's a couple of loops through mesas that far beyond where Susie, Yazi, and now her daughter Effie lived. And I thought that was as far south as anybody could go. And here, my guide's taken me, I don't know how far beyond that. I mean, we're actually on the back side of us is Hunts Mesa. That's as far south as you can get before, it just rises. So we were out there, in early morning light, and I just love this rock formation. And so what I've done is just, I built, again, the image. The person on the left is a San Felipe Indian. I only know him by his first name, Tony. And again, this is on Rebecca's rodeo horse, Shorty. And the other two figures we had down here in the back, in the cottonwood trees near the arena. My studio assistant I'm working with now, Danny McCoy, knows he's native. And so living here in Santa Fe, I said, we need, some Navajo women, if we can find any, that I can put on horseback. They have to know how to be able to ride. And he just called up young artists that he knew. So these were two Navajo ladies who live here in Santa Fe, as practicing young artists. And, we just had them out, and I just put the whole image together, like that. And then I called it the conversation.
Nice painting as well. Yeah, the conversation. You can see the people talking next to the back of the rock. Right. By the way, how do you get your titles? I mean, do they come to you after your painting is done, or do you kind of have the idea
pretty much
of what it is?
I mean, sometimes I've got over to my right, I have two notepads, and I write down titles specifically that come to my head. Sometimes, because I watch films in the evening, regardless of whether they're film noir or they're contemporary or they're old Western, there'll be some piece of dialogue or something like that. And whoa, God, that's great. And I have a notepad right there and I write it down. Other times I paint these things and I'm just clueless as to how to name them. And I can't always be brilliant or clever with every title. So sometimes things get a really generic title. But in this case, I like the idea specifically of the two ladies, in the back having a conversation while, Tony is looking on. So that would be easy, when I can come up with something very specific and I think it's, notable or relevant, to the image.
Next image, please. So this is something I think you're really well known for, is this cowboy, kind of almost a Pulp Fiction type of imagery. I don't know if I've ever gotten one I didn't sell within a week, but they're just so unique. And tell me about how that evolved, this, cowboy on horseback, but it has this sense of a Pulp Fiction kind of thing.
Well, it is from a Pulp Fiction cover. As I expanded my reference material from black and white and color movie stills that I've acquired over the years, I can't remember even how many years ago it was that I started getting the idea of getting these Pulp Fiction images specifically to use in my paintings. I can remember going to Park and Swap down in Apache Junction back in the late 70s, and you'd see pulp magazines, and I'd pick them up just because I thought they were I don't know, fun, cute, charming, whatever. I didn't have any idea about using them as subject matter until much later. I don't even know how far back this goes, 10 years, 12, 15. But this was one that I got that was probably from the early 30s. And so, and then I have to redraw them. I mean, sometimes they're just, these things were knocked out. And very rarely will you find an illustrator who would take the time to do a really good detailed image, specifically for a pulp magazine. A lot of the original art, just gets thrown away from this era. So I kind of reconstruct it and try to make it a little more specific, where sometimes there's just a slash of color and it's, a gesture for, a saddle horn or whatever. And or I change the hats sometimes. A lot of times in these pulps, there are no hats. The hat's already flown off. So I got to draw in the figure and put the hat back on, put a scarf on where there isn't, or it's too big or too small or whatever. So I change details like that. Then I drop it into, this was a landscape from Canyonlands. And then in the far back to the right is a bit of Monument Valley. So that's how, so that's how this image got put together.
Next photo. So you've done also a new series with this moon. You've done it with both cowboys and women, and maybe you could describe or just talk a little bit about what this, very bold color of the moon and what it represents in your paintings.
Well, I sometimes like to do these, kind of semi-portraits. So I got the figure way in the foreground, and I don't want to put a full landscape behind it. I want you to be able to actually focus on the figure. So I got the idea of, just putting a moon behind him, and sometimes a cast shadow onto the moon, which is a whole nother genre within the genre. And it makes it, so it's like stage lit, or it's a night, a nocturne. And I have to say, watching all these other illustrators from the first part of the 20th century, occasionally using big circles or big moons or big suns. So it was just a design technique or element that I borrowed again, from the illustrators and the pulps. To use in these small portraits. And I think it works. I think it's, pretty effective.
Yeah, very much so. I like them a lot, actually. And the next photo is one of these again. And, you have had over the years to do cowgirls in your Imagery. And maybe you could
Mhm.
discuss that a little bit. Not only that, but the nudes, because the next few slides are the nudes of that.
Okay.
Tell me how that evolved and a little bit about that.
Well, actually, the nudes came about uh, almost immediately after I left New York. I did my first series, I think around 1976, 77. I had nudes on horseback. Um, this was in Jackson Hole. I was lucky enough to meet two gals who both were, great horsewomen, horsemen, whatever. And I got them to ride around. So that was a good bunch of slides that I shot. And then this is from a series from 1990. I did 2 photo shoots with her, and I've done a couple other versions of this, but never. I mean, in the past it would be a full landscape, like I said, in some of these, and our bigger painting, and with a full sky and all that. So when we were in this lockdown last March, April, May, and my studio assistant couldn't come to work here. We thought he couldn't, so he was at home. I was at home, and I thought, well, if he's going to help me, I mean, because he helps me do the finished second coats, let's go to a smaller scale so we can transport the paintings back and forth from his house to my studio. So all of a sudden we had these smaller scale canvases, which you have some. And I changed, and the way I have painted from this slide a couple of times, years ago, it's just different. I just thought what I've done here is a more sophisticated palette. This time, I used to use maybe a straight, for instance, a straight cadmium red, almost right out of the tube. But now I've got these off reds or off browns. I mean, nothing is purely out of the tube color. And then, again, using the moons, there was about 7 or 8 of these that I did in March, April, May. And I just thought this was a really powerful, experiment and result. I liked it a lot.
Yeah, we'll look at a couple more too, Pat.
Okay.
The next one, here's one, a shadow girl.
Now, here's this gal I worked with, again, up in Jackson Hole for about 11 years. And I had this slide forever and ever and ever. And it was pretty much like a silhouette. And I never figured out how in the world to make it effective as a painting until I started doing this series. And I think what I'm doing is resolving or taking risk with, I mean, in the past, say I don't know when, in the 80s, 90s, that would have been a silhouette with just the harsh highlights. And then, a cloudscape or a landscape or both behind the figure. But ultimately, I don't think they were as effective as what this series was. And, separating out the scarf, the hat, her, a couple of flesh tones in shadow to give it some detail, so it just wasn't one big flat silhouette. So that's why I thought this thing worked.
Is a white scarf. Yeah, the scarf. Well, yeah, that one has that person has personality. You can just see it in their face.
Right. This was my first nude. This is from a photo shoot in 1976. Now, as the years have gone by, the decades have gone by, and I look back at my older work, and if I have, paintings where I've got an entire face in shadow, I don't think they're as well resolved in 1977 or 1987 or 1997 as what I could do now. I particularly like the way I could, put all this into shadow and be effective with it. And again, I like the simplicity of just putting it, against the moon. That was a slide I never used until now.
Yeah, it's very effective. Yeah, I like these. Next photo is you collect Kachinas, so you have one Kachina piece that you put in. What is it about that Kachinas that really draw you into wanting to put them into a painting?
Well, they have to. There's millions of them I look at, and I don't use. I did 3 of these, not this one, but three different Kachinas from the George Terasaki collection when that went up to auction at
Right.
Sotheby's about a year ago,
Right.
or a year and a half ago. And boy, once you get, as you are, familiar with the Kachinas, you can see the quality can be radically different. Yeah, particularly with the older ones, that have real character, and that's the ones I photograph, right out of the auction catalogs, or on the occasion that I buy a Kachina, and I photograph that so I can really be in control of the lighting, to cast these shadows. That's something I always do. If I paint a Kachina flat on, because the colors are flat anyway, I can make it really boring real quick. So I make a point of, having a cast shadow up, to the left or from the right, but, coming across so I can give the thing some dimension. And then I cast that shadow, behind the Kachina. Again, if I paint it just against a flat background, it's just not as compelling as doing it this way. And quite often I go to a darker background so that the Kachina comes forward, off the picture plane. So it's just different things I figured out how to do over the years from doing.
And you got it right from the Kachina point of view too. This is the early 1900, 1910 Kachina. Right. You can tell by the hands being close to the belly and just the type of designs. And, you're taking a little liberties with the colors, but you can see it with the pop out eyes and the wear. So I thought that was an extremely successful painting.
Oh, thanks.
Next photograph is, I want to talk a little bit about your Stereographs, because this is a series that you have been doing for a very long time, and you have a book that is on the way out right now. So maybe you could talk a little bit about your Stereographs, and Pat, maybe
can they see this?
Go through it. Yeah, we're going to have an image of that book.
Okay,
actually.
This is a new book that I just updated. I originally did a book of my, it was then the catalog raisonné of my Stereographs, and we did that book in 2010, and at that point I had 54 editions through the course of my career. And then since then, I started co-publishing with a gallery that represents me in England that specializes and focuses specifically on print editions. So this was perfect for me. And I've since done more. And then, so in the new book, this one we're looking at now, print editions, there is one lithograph, there is one etching, there are the three versions of a descanso that are digital image that I built in the camera, in the computer, and then the other ongoing Stereographs. So at this point, there are 75 images in this book. So it's grown by 21 images since 2010. And the other thing that we included in this, much like with the auction houses and all that, I didn't realize how specific some collectors are about the type of paper that was used. And it's sometimes confusing, is what is the image size? What is the paper size? Because those are two different things. Right. And we also included, beyond the editions, we put in, if there were printer's proofs, how many? If there was artist proofs, how many? And the other thing, I think a major reason why these Stereographs are successful is because I've kept the editions very small. And by doing that, the people who have bought in, once the editions are sold out, these continue on outside of my control into the secondary market, and they have gone up, some of them exponentially over the years. Some that I brought out, 45 years ago or whatever, at 250 or 350 or 400, can be now worth 5,500. And there's plenty of them that are worth 3,500, 4,000. And, most of those editions, when I sold them out at 750, 800, 1,200 the most. So I just think it was wiser. Then I looked at other people, like specifically Fritz Scholder. He did too many editions in too short a period of time, and the editions are all long, or most of them are long. And so it's harder for those editions to go up in value over time even. There's too many of them in
So
each
let's look
edition.
at a couple of those, Pat, if you could just, so here's
Yeah.
one of those that uses your titles, right? That's
Right.
Bob Hope and Roy Rogers, I guess.
Yep. This is from a movie still. It was a black and white movie still from Paleface, I think 1952. And this was
Everything about that is now inappropriate.
I know. Well, this was a direct, I love to make social political commentary. And this was, I did this print when Ronald Reagan was, president, and Nancy Reagan, her answer to the drug problem was just say no. And I had this
Right.
movie still, and I didn't have to exaggerate that hat. I thought, this is crazy. Who, of course,
Yeah.
it was a comedy. This is a 30-gallon hat, that Bob Hope is wearing. And he's got this glazed look in his eyes. This was perfect. So whatever it was he was holding, I just changed it to be a joint. And
Yeah.
then, have Roy Rogers just being quietly saying, just say no, Bob. I just thought that was absolutely an appropriate image to make at that time.
Next one, Pat. I think we've got a nice landscape. So they're not all just cowboys and Indian things.
Yeah, that's
but,
true. On rare
you have,
occasion, I've got one, Land of the Dene, and that was in Monument Valley also, I think from 1990. And this too is also Monument Valley, but I took some liberties here. Right in the main part of the valley, of course, there are no cottonwood trees. There are in some of the outer canyons, Narrow Canyon and out towards Copper Canyon. And I don't think there's any wolves in Monument Valley either. But I like the whole notion of it. I love this image. And I did it the exact same size as the painting. The original painting, which we kept, is 3630. So that's a large scale.
yeah, that's a big one.
Stereograph, yeah.
All right. I think we may have run through what we had. Yeah. So the last little bit I think we'll talk about before we take questions is this is another book you've done, which is Museum Corporations and Public Collections. So what number of museum collections are you in now? 48, 44? What is it?
56.
There you go, even more. Keeps growing.
Right. And I don't even know how many corporate or public collections. I know there's 162 pages in this book. So that represents 162 paintings and serigraphs that are in these various different collections, which I didn't realize I had that much work in, that were not in privately owned hands, but there was a lot. So
yeah, and you're in really pretty much every major museum collection. Well, definitely on the West Coast, but really there's others too on the East Coast and everywhere.
Yeah, they're all over the country. I'm in all the major Western art museums, with the exception of the where they have the Prix de West. They've changed the name. No.
Oh, you mean Oklahoma City? I'm sorry.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
They changed the name of it. It used to be the Cowboy Hall of Fame, but it isn't that anymore.
Right.
But I think they only collect the people that show with them in the Prix de West. I think that whole collection is based on that. So,
but that's an impressive thing to see. 50. What is it? 56.
Yeah, 56
museum collections. Yeah, that's pretty unheard of for. I would say that might be. I can't think of any living artist for sure that has that many. Otherwise, you're looking at people like, Maynard Dixon or Remington or Russell, quite frankly. Yeah.
Right. No, I'm very proud of that.
Okay, let's see if, yeah, you should be. That's pretty amazing. Let's look at some questions. If we have some, we can open that up. And Pat, you want to do that part?
Hi, everybody. My name is Patrick. I do the podcast editing and marketing for Mark Sublette Medicine Man Gallery. Now, if y'all have any questions, there is a little comic book looking dialog box down at the bottom of your user interface that says chat. Click on the chat icon, and if you have a question for Billy, type it into the chat and I'll read it off to him when we get him.
Yeah, that's good. You got to read it off because I'm not computer literate, so I don't know how to do what you're talking about.
I got your back, Billy. Don't worry about it.
Oh, good.
Mhm. And I do see that Julie Saucy's on. That's nice to see
Oh,
you,
is she?
Julie.
All
Yeah.
right. Well, believe it or not, Julie actually wrote the first question. And
Good. Of
Julie
course she did.
asks, who wrote the essay for your fabulous new book on your stereographs?
Oh, she might be familiar with that person. She's probably known her for quite a few years. Her name is Julie Saucy. In fact, it's her.
Yeah.
She did write the first one for me. And then when I told her we were going to, do this updated version, we got back together, and I don't know how much more text that we did add to it, and re-edited all of the text. Oh man, I think it was 7 or 8 times until every hyphenation, every comma, every T was crossed. It should be perfect.
I'm sure it will with Julie. There's no doubt about that. Maybe I saw Dennis Zaminsky's on here, so I'd like to see if you have something you want to ask him. Dennis is an artist that you collect, Billy. So
Yep.
he's listening to everything too. Maybe he has a question just out of curiosity.
In the meantime, Mark Chase asks, what do you do with the paintings used for the stereographs?
Yeah, I actually, some of them I still own. Go back to I think it's 1983. There's a nude that's titled "My Summer Vacation," and it's a cowgirl popping out of the swimming pool. I have the original painting, and I think purely by default because it's about 85 by 70 inches, so it would have been about $1 gajillion, and nobody was going to spend that much money on a big nude. So I have that. I have actually we have several. I would guess maybe 9 or 10 of the original paintings in our permanent collection, which some of those go, travel to different, museum retrospectives that I have. So,
yeah, that's something we might mention is you've had a lot of single person museum retrospectives, and people are always including your work in pretty much any major show of Western, especially contemporary Western art. There seems to be a Schenck going on in some show pretty much always.
Yeah, we got the Warhol Schenck retrospective coming up in Great Falls, Montana in June. And there'll be a catalog that should be out before then on that. And Michael DeShaman wrote the text for that one.
All right, this next question is a doozy. Mark asks, scuttlebutt in galleries and taco trucks suggest your unmatched variety of color palettes, subject matter, and fearless approach to Western art comes from drinking peyote-infused mountain moonshine. My question is, at what age did you begin this regimen, and do you recommend it for others?
This is from Mark Ertl over in Indianapolis. He's a madman. Don't pay attention to him. You need to get, what do you call it? Ghost him. I can't answer that question. He can answer it better than me. That's your answer.
There you go. Next.
Well, you know what? I think that about wraps up the chat questions that we have already typed, unless there's a last call. Any stragglers?
Dennis Zaminsky on the spot. Otherwise, I'll ask a question for you.
Okay.
Do you do illustrations, by the way, Bill? Like Dennis, I know, has done a lot of different illustrations. You worked as an illustrator in New York City about the same time that you were leaving, I think, really. But have you done some of that yourself?
Actually, no. I never had any intent to do illustration. I don't think I had that kind of a talent. There was a magazine publisher in Des Moines, Iowa, who on occasion would, commission me, to do a painting. And I guess, there was about 4 or 5 of those I did over a 2 or 3 year period. And I think by definition, they would be considered illustrations, but that was pretty much the extent of anything
Well,
I did.
I did one. You did one for my book. I made you do one for my book, which was Hidden Canyon. So there's that one too. And they do work very nicely as illustrations, I might add. So, all right. I think Mark Chase has one of the questions. Have you ever mentored anyone? I don't know if Mark Chase wants to take up painting or not, but
Yeah, I think by default I have. Boy, I didn't mentor this guy, but Sandy Scoggin was my first studio assistant on a regular basis in New York. I got her right out of graduate school, and she became, I mean, her work didn't look anything like mine, nor did I really mentor her, but I was impressed with the fact that after I left New York, she hooked on with Leo Castelli, who was the most major contemporary art dealer of the entire 20th century. And she was the last artist that he ever took on. And she's had major museum retrospectives, and she does photo work. She sets up an entire environments and then photographs them. After that, I have had over the years a number of people who worked with me here in the studio and went on to, have their own careers as artists. The latest being Katie Kidd. She was with me for 6.5 years. And I know people when they're helping me here, they pay attention to how I structure images. They pay attention to how I concoct a palette of colors. And I think I keep getting more and more and more sophisticated as time goes on with that. And I'm amazed at how specifically they pay attention to how I make colors and how I make colors fit, with other colors within the image. But I bet you I've had a dozen studio assistants who have gone on to have their own careers as painters over the years.
Terry Menendez asked a question too, is how do you decide what to frame and not to frame? And that's a good question. I'm actually kind of interested in the answer on that one.
Well, when I first started making paintings in New York, and anybody who was a contemporary painter at that time, and this is coming out of the abstract expressionist colored field painters, everything was a big scale and nobody framed anything. It just was not a part of commercial representation of your work in a gallery setting. It wasn't until I came back, I mean, I was doing all kinds of stuff, but I didn't frame anything until I came back to do very specifically Western subject matter in 2009. And also by then I scaled down the work to a large degree. I mean, I didn't do 16 by 20 or 2024s or anything like that for the most part when I was younger. But I saw that all the other people who I considered my peers in the Western art market were all, framing their work. And we were doing this with reframing, when we were buying and selling historic paintings. Everything had to be a hand-carved gold leaf frame. Well, obviously, a painting does look better with those kind of frames. And I didn't resist it anymore. I just knew this was going to be an added expense that I had not had before. Suddenly I'm going to be spending, $1,33,000 a year just on framing, which didn't happen. But there's no question they look better.
Except I think your
frames.
caption paintings look better. I like your caption paintings better without them, honestly.
Well, I put just a white frame. I mean, there's no gold, there's no,
Sure. Very small. And
so my pop work is always just a very minimal frame, and the more, if you will, traditional or more romantic work, there's a full palette. There'll be a gold leaf frame on those.
Well, I think we've gone over an hour. Sounds about the appropriate time to stop. But the great thing is you can come see the show, which is up all this month and probably a little bit into May if we have stuff left. So I encourage everyone who wants to see it, where the gallery's open, you can see it. It's hanging now. Of course, today's the opening, or you can see it online. Any last words, Bill, before we call it a day?
I think we've covered it pretty well, don't you? I think we've done good.
So. Huh? Yeah, the only thing I wish is we could go to the shed right now and go have some enchiladas.
Yeah, I had some tacos for lunch today. They were good.
Yeah, very good. Well, this has been fun, Bill, and thanks for taking the time. Yeah, I wish you could be here for your show, but in some ways this is more intimate, and very enjoyable. So this will be up as a podcast. People can review it and see it again if they want to, coming this Wednesday. So thanks, Bill.
Okay.
Thanks everybody for listening and coming. I appreciate it, and supporting our gallery and supporting Billy.
Okay. Bye-bye. Thanks. Bye.
We need your support for the Medicine Man Gallery channel, so make sure to click the subscribe button and tap the little bell icon to be notified when we upload a new video, which we do every morning on Wednesday and Friday. See you soon.